Sex offenses are among the worst in our society. They leave physical and emotional trauma that can last a lifetime and are considered by some to be as serious as criminal homicide. It's important to define several terms that are found throughout this section of the Penal Code before we talk about the offenses themselves. The first definition found in the Penal Code sex offense section is deviant sexual intercourse. Deviant sexual intercourse is defined as any contact between any part of the genitals of one person and the mouth or anus of another person, or the penetration of the genitals or the anus of another person with an object. Next, the Penal Code defines sexual contact. Sexual contact includes any touching of the anus, breast, or any part of the genitals of another person. Note, the offenses of indecency with a child and improper relationship between an educator and student have their own definitions of sexual contact. Finally, the Penal Code defines sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse refers exclusively to the penetration of the female sex organ by the male sex organ. Like other Texas Penal Code offenses which are characterized as continuous sexual abuse of young child or disabled individual is intended for those who repeatedly victimize the most defenseless among us. Note, this offense was formerly known as continuous sexual abuse of young child or children, but the title was changed along with the contents of the crime by the 87th Texas Legislature. It's also important to note that, for the purposes of this offense, child and disabled individual have the same meaning as found in Penal Code sections 22.011 and 22.021. Section 22.011, which is the crime of sexual assault, defines a child as younger than 17. Section 22.021, which is the crime of aggravated sexual assault, defines a disabled individual as a person older than 13 who, by reason of age or physical or mental disease, defect, or injury, is unable to provide food, shelter, or medical care for themselves. A key to this offense is the definition of acts of sexual abuse. According to the Penal Code, acts of sexual abuse include aggravated kidnapping with intent to violate or abuse sexually, indecency with a child other than by exposure or by touching through clothing the breast of a child, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, burglary with the intent to commit aggravated kidnapping, indecency with a child, sexual assault, or aggravated sexual assault, sexual performance by a child, trafficking of persons, and compelling prostitution. So, according to the Penal Code, a defendant who, during a 30 or more day period, commits 2 or more of these acts of sexual abuse against one or more victims when the actor is 17 or older and the victim is younger than 14, or when one or more of the victims is a disabled individual, commits continuous sexual abuse of young child or disabled individual. The Penal Code recognizes sexual activity between 2 consenting teenagers would be considered criminal the way this statute is written. So this is the first statute we'll encounter which sets out an affirmative defense to help distinguish between conduct between, say, a 17-year-old and an otherwise consenting 14-year-old, whose parents then find out and become very angry over the matter, and, say, a 40-year-old committing the conduct with a 14-year-old. This affirmative defense is sometimes informally referred to as a Romeo and Juliet defense in criminal law. According to the Penal Code, it is an affirmative defense to continuous sexual abuse of a young child if the actor was not more than 5 years older than the victim, if only one victim, or the youngest victim, if more than one, and the actor did not use force or threat, and the actor was not required to register for life as a sex offender. Again, this defense applies only when the victim is a child. All offenses of continuous sexual abuse of young child or disabled individual are felonies of the first degree, with a mandatory prison term of life or 25 to 99 years.
Our society generally feels that sex is best left in the bedroom. The Texas Penal Code offense of public lewdness reinforces this belief.
According to the Penal Code, a person or persons, since it generally takes 2 to tango as they say, commits public lewdness if they knowingly engage in sexual intercourse, deviate sexual intercourse, or sexual contact, and
these acts occur in a public place, or if not in a public place, the actors are reckless about whether another person is present who will be offended or alarmed. So the bottom line is, you can be criminally charged with this offense if you are participating in these sexual acts and recklessly, knowingly, or intentionally failed to close the drapes in your house or hotel room, and another person who sees you is offended or alarmed. The offense of public lewdness is an A misdemeanor, which sometimes surprises those caught in the act by a peace officer. The penalty of the highest misdemeanor in Texas could be accounted for the fact that this law was written in 1973 and last updated in 1994. While most sexual offenses are considered particularly heinous, there are some that appear to be less serious. Concern is warranted, however, because some studies indicate serious sexual offenses are preceded by a period of the offender committing multiple minor offenses. Essentially, the less serious sexual offenses may be warning signs of more serious criminal sexual behavior later on. The Texas Penal Code offense of indecent exposure is one such minor offense, which may be a red flag for future more serious offenses. Indecent exposure is exposing one's anus or any part of one's genitals with the intent to gratify or arouse the sexual desire of any person when reckless about whether or not another person is present who will be offended or alarmed. Indecent exposure offenses are B misdemeanors.
Bestiality is, for lack of a better characterization, a form of animal cruelty prohibited under the Texas Penal Code. There are several ways to commit this offense. First, a person commits bestiality if the person knowingly engages in an act involving contact between the person's mouth, anus, or genitals and the anus or genitals of an animal, or the person's anus or genitals and the mouth of the animal. Next, bestiality is committed if the actor fondles or touches the anus or genitals of an animal, including touching through clothing, causes an animal to contact the seminal fluid of an actor, or inserts any part of his or her body or object into the anus or genitals of an animal in a manner not a generally accepted animal husbandry or veterinary practice. Bestiality is also committed when a person possesses, sells, transfers, purchases, or obtains an animal for bestiality, organizes, promotes, conducts, or participates as an observer of bestiality, or causes or aids another person in engaging in bestiality, permits bestiality to occur on premises under their control, advertises, offers, or accepts an offer to obtain an animal for bestiality, or, finally, engages in bestiality in the presence of a child younger than 18. It is an exception to the application of this section that the conduct engaged in by the actor is a generally accepted and otherwise lawful animal husbandry or veterinary practice. Bestiality committed in the presence of a child younger than 18 is a felony of the second degree. If death or serious bodily injury of the animal results, the offense is also a felony of the second degree. All other offenses are state jail felonies.
What we might know informally as child molestation is covered under the Texas Penal Code offense of indecency with a child. There are several types of situations covered under this statute. The first type of indecency with child involves an adult engaging in sexual contact with a child younger than 17. The Penal Code defines contact as any touching of the anus, breast, or any part of the genitals of another person. This offense may occur over or under the clothing of the child and may be informally referred to in the court as indecency by contact. This particular offense is a felony of the second degree. The next type of indecency with child is committed when a person, with intent to arouse or gratify sexual desire, exposes his or her anus or any part of his or her genitals knowing a child younger than 17 is present. Keep in mind, this isn't just exposing yourself. It's exposure combined with the intent to arouse or gratify sexual desire. This particular part of the offense may be referred to informally in the court as indecency by exposure. This type of indecency with child also involves an adult who causes a child younger than 17 to expose his or her anus or any part of their genitals, again with the intent to arouse or gratify sexual desire. These two types of indecency with child offenses are felonies of the third degree. The final type of indecency with a child occurs when an adult causes a child younger than 17 to engage in sexual contact with another. This type of indecency with child is a felony of the second degree.
This statute states these offenses are committed regardless of whether the actor knew the age of the victim at the time of the offense. This means the mistake of fact offense, or essentially a defendant arguing, "I didn't know the child wasn't 17," or "I thought the child was 17," may not be used. The offense is committed regardless of the defendant's knowledge of the age.
Now, the Penal Code recognizes sexual activity between two age-appropriate consenting teenagers would be considered criminal the way this statute is written, so it sets out an affirmative defense to help distinguish between a situation such as these acts occurring between, say, a 16-year-old and a 28-year-old, which is clearly inappropriate, and a situation of these acts occurring between a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old, which is far more acceptable. This affirmative defense is sometimes informally referred to as a Romeo and Juliet defense in criminal law. The Penal Code states it is an affirmative defense to indecency with child if there is 3 years or less age difference between the persons, no duress, force, or threat was used, and the actor was not a registered sex offender, or the actor was the spouse of the child.
There's several circumstances recognized in the Texas Penal Code where the power differential between two people makes it such that consent cannot be considered effective when it comes to sexual relationships. In other words, the differential in power between, say, a correctional officer and an inmate, or a teacher and a student of a certain age, make it such that the inmate or student might express consent to a sexual act, but may be actually doing so for fear of negative consequences by the officer or teacher who has a great degree of control over their life. In this screencast, we'll talk about the Texas Penal Code offense of improper relationship between educator and student. First, in this section, it's important to distinguish that for this offense and this offense only, sexual contact means any touching by an employee of the anus, breast, or any part of the genitals of a person enrolled in a public or private, primary or secondary school at which the employee works, or any touching by an employee of the anus, breast, or any part of the genitals of a student participant in an educational activity in which enrolled students are the primary participants sponsored by a school district or a public or private primary or secondary school, and if this touching is committed with the intent to arouse or gratify the sexual desire of any person. Keep in mind, what distinguishes the definition of sexual contact in this offense compared to other penal code offenses that contain this definition is that sexual contact here refers exclusively to sexual contact between an employee and student or student participant. Otherwise, the definition is practically the same. An actor commits this offense when they are an employee of a public or private elementary, middle, or high school, and they engage in sexual contact, intercourse, or deviate sexual intercourse with a person enrolled at the school. The offense is also committed by an educator, volunteer, or employee of a public or private elementary, middle, or high school who engages in sexual contact, intercourse, or deviate sexual intercourse with a person the actor knows is enrolled in a public or private school, or who is a student participant in an activity sponsored by the school or school district. Or finally, this offense is committed by an employee of a public or private elementary, middle, or high school who commits the offense of online solicitation of a minor with a person they know is a student enrolled at their school in their same school district, or a participant at a student activity in their same school district. All offenses of improper relationship between educator and student are felonies of the second degree. So note, the elements of this offense don't necessarily require another sexual offense we might traditionally think of as being committed between an adult teacher and a child student. Of course, if there is an extreme age difference outside the scope of the Romeo and Juliet affirmative defenses for, say, sexual assault and aggravated sexual assault, then those offenses may apply as well. The distinction of this offense is the actor and victim status as teacher and student. To illustrate, there may be an instance in a high school with, for example, a 21-year-old teacher and a 17-year-old student in which the sex is completely consensual and not otherwise an offense, but the relationship between the two, teacher and student makes it illegal under this statute. Of course, the statute includes only elementary through high school, so the same relationship between a 21-year-old tutor and a 17-year-old student at a university, community college, or junior college setting is not illegal, though it may be a violation of that school's administrative policy. There is a Romeo and Juliet affirmative defense to this statute, but it's pretty narrow. The affirmative defense may be raised if the actor is married to the student or the actor was not more than 3 years older than the enrolled person, and the parties had a relationship prior to employment of the actor at the school. The Penal Code adds several stipulations regarding the release of information pertaining to this offense. First, according to the Penal Code, the name of the student involved may not be released to the public and is not public information. Next, a public or private primary or secondary school may not release externally to the general public the name of an employee of the school who is accused of committing this offense until the employee is indicted for the offense by a grand jury. This doesn't include releasing the name to the Texas Education Agency, another state agency, or local law enforcement, or as otherwise required by law, or to the school members or community in accordance with the school's policies or procedures, or with the religious law observed by the school, and this also doesn't include releasing the name as necessary to other proper authorities in order to conduct an investigation of the accusation.
Any person with a cell phone can spontaneously make a video of almost anything at any time. In addition, very small digital cameras that are easily concealed are widely available for purchase by any person. While the First Amendment generally protects your right to make a video in a public place, it does not protect your right to invade another person's reasonable expectation of privacy, particularly when the recording is sexual in nature. In fact, it's a criminal offense in the Texas Penal Code. The Penal Code offense of invasive visual recording was previously known as improper photography or visual recording. The language of the old statute was vague and ruled by Texas courts to be unconstitutional. The 84th legislature replaced this law with a new one with more specific and constitutional language. One of the first major changes from the old law is a section of definitions, some of which are very similar to definitions found in the obscenity section of the Penal Code. The statute of invasive visual recording first defines the female breast as any portion of the female breast below the top of the areola. Next, it defines intimate area as the naked or clothed genitals, pubic area, anus, buttocks, or female breast. Finally, it defines changing room as a room or area provided for changing of clothing, including dressing in locker rooms or swimwear changing areas. A person commits the offense of invasive visual recording if he or she, without consent and with intent to invade privacy, photographs, videotapes, or electronically records, broadcasts, or transmits a visual image of the intimate area of another if that other person has a reasonable expectation of privacy and the area is not subject to public view. They also commit the offense of invasive visual recording if he or she photographs, videotapes, or electronically records, broadcasts, or transmits a visual image of another in a bathroom or changing room. Finally, a person commits the offense of invasive visual recording if he or she promotes these types of images. So in other words, posting them online or making them available to the public. Just to be clear, you can commit this offense either by taking the pictures or videos or by just promoting them, even if you weren't the one who took or recorded them. All of these offenses under the statute are state jail felonies, and the Penal Code states a sign saying, "You are being recorded," does not establish the victim's consent.
The full title of this Texas Penal Code statute is Unlawful Disclosure or Promotion of Intimate Visual Material, but it's easier to call it by its informal name, the Revenge Porn Law. The availability of technology has allowed consenting adults to make videos or pictures of each other in sexual situations. Problems arise, however, when the relationship ends and one party, who received or made the images with consent of the other, posts them on the internet or on social media without the other person's consent. While this kind of act could only previously be regulated with a civil tort lawsuit, the 84th Texas legislature made it a criminal offense. First, The Penal Code states a person commits unlawful disclosure or promotion of intimate visual material if they, without effective consent and with intent to harm, discloses visual material of another with intimate parts exposed, or engaging in sexual conduct created under circumstances in which the actor knows or has reason to believe the other person had a reasonable expectation the material would remain private. In addition, this exposure must cause harm and reveal the identity of the person through essentially any means. Next, the Penal Code states a person can commit unlawful disclosure or promotion of intimate visual material if they attempt to blackmail another person by threatening release of the intimate visual material. Or finally, a person can commit this offense by operating a website or other similar forum that promotes revenge porn. This is a screenshot of one such semi-famous revenge porn site which falls under this conduct. The site is no longer online. The Penal Code states it is not a defense the visual material was created with consent or the victim voluntarily transmitted the visual material to the actor. So in other words, just because your significant other consents to creating the images or video or sends them to you doesn't mean they automatically consent to you transmitting it after the relationship ends. It is an affirmative defense the disclosure of the intimate visual material was part of a law enforcement investigation, medical treatment, or a legal proceeding. It is also an affirmative defense the disclosure of the intimate visual material was in the course of reporting unlawful activity. So, for instance, the video or images were made consensually, but the disclosure occurs in order to report statutory rape to the police, and the video or images are evidence of that offense. It is an affirmative defense the disclosure of the intimate visual material was made in a public or commercial setting and involved voluntary exposure or sexual conduct. So two people can't make a video, both consent to its release, and then one of them later have second thoughts and try to pursue criminal charges against the other. Finally, it is an affirmative defense the actor is an interactive computer service. All of the offenses under the revenge porn statute are state jail felonies.
Voyeurism is a new statute added to the Texas Penal Code by the 84th Legislature. This could also be referred to informally as the Peeping Tom statute. It's somewhat of a novelty because the prohibited conduct it covers was already covered under the existing disorderly conduct statute and continues to be covered by that statute. The Penal Code states a person who, with intent to arouse or gratify the sexual desire of any person, observes another person without consent in a dwelling or structure where the other person has a reasonable expectation of privacy, commits voyeurism. There is concern among some legal experts this law will eventually be found unconstitutional, since the prohibited conduct described in the statute could also seem to describe an accidental viewing. So essentially, the wording may be too vague. A difference between the voyeurism statute and the disorderly conduct statute involve enhancements for this offense. A person who commits voyeurism and has 2 or more prior convictions of voyeurism commits a B misdemeanor. If the victim is a child younger than 14, it is also a B misdemeanor. All other voyeurism offenses are Class C misdemeanors, which is the same penalty level as the similar prohibited conduct found in the disorderly conduct law.
As mentioned previously, the prevalence of cameras with smartphone technology has made it fairly easy for consenting adults to send each other intimate pictures and videos. But what happens when one person in the relationship begins pressuring or even threatens the other with a criminal act in order to get him or her to send photos or videos he or she is not comfortable sending? Or even when a person who is not in a dating or intimate relationship with another demands or threatens the other to send photos or videos he or she doesn't want to send. The Penal Code offense of sexual coercion is designed to criminalize these sorts of acts. A person commits an offense if the person intentionally threatens, including by coercion or extortion, to commit a Penal Code Chapter 43 offense, which includes such offenses as prostitution and compelling prostitution, certain trafficking of persons offenses, continuous sexual abuse of young child or children, indecent exposure, indecency with child, improper relationship between educator and student, invasive visual recording, unlawful disclosure or promotion of intimate visual material, otherwise known as revenge porn, voyeurism, sexual assault, or aggravated sexual assault to obtain in return for not committing the threatened offense or in connection with the threatened offense, intimate visual material, which is material depicting another person with the person's intimate parts exposed or engaged in sexual conduct, an act involving sexual conduct causing arousal or gratification, or a monetary benefit or other benefit of value. A person also commits an offense if the person intentionally threatens, including by coercion or extortion, to commit an offense under Penal Code Chapter 19, which covers criminal homicide offenses, Penal Code Chapter 20, which covers kidnapping offenses, or certain trafficking of persons offenses to obtain in return for not committing the threatened offense or in connection with the threatened offense, intimate visual material, or an act involving sexual conduct causing arousal or gratification. This section applies to a threat, regardless of how that threat is communicated, including a threat transmitted through email or an internet website, social media account, or chat room, and a threat made by any other electronic or technological means. Sexual coercion is a felony of the third degree for those defendants with a prior conviction. All other offenses are state jail felonies. As we have previously alluded to, the prevalence of cameras and smartphones and computers has led to several new laws to keep up with the types of misconduct that can be facilitated with technology. The Texas Penal Code offense of unlawful electronic transmission of sexually explicit material, or as it's informally referred to, the dick pic law, makes sending unsolicited pictures of genitalia a criminal offense. A person commits this offense if the person knowingly transmits by electronic means visual material that depicts any person engaging in sexual conduct with the person's intimate parts exposed, the covered genitals of a male person that are in a discernibly turgid state, and either of these were not sent at the request of or with the express consent of the recipient. All offenses under the statute are C misdemeanors. Finally, if conduct that constitutes an offense under this section also constitutes an offense under another section, the actor may be prosecuted under this section, the other law, or both.